Hello and welcome to the Conscious Diva podcast. I'm Tatiana, and joining me today in this episode is Nichole Bigley. Nichole is a psychic intuitive who's been talking to angels her entire life. She's also the host of the very popular weekly podcast, A Psychic's Story, and the co-author of Looking for Angels, a guide to understanding and connecting with angels. In this episode, Nichole shares how to connect with your spirit team and who they might be made up of. We also discuss how we can strengthen our intuition and discern the differences between voices in our heads and spirit guidance. We also discuss the differences between archangels, angels, seraphim, and cherubim. I hope you enjoyed this really exciting conversation about angels and spirit guides. For more information, you can visit the show page notes for everything on this episode number 72. And you can follow me on Instagram at The Conscious Diva. Thank you so much for listening. We can begin. Thank you so much, Nichole, for being here today. I am so grateful that you could make the time so that we can continue the conversation that I had with your co-author, Scott Guerin, about your book, Looking for Angels.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Honored to be here. Sorry I wasn't able to make it with Scott, but thanks for scheduling this so that I could join.
Yeah, you know what? It actually worked out, I think, better because it was really nice to chat to Scott because, as you know, you guys wrote the book. He had definitely has experienced a much more recent set of circumstances which connected him to his spirit guides and spirit animals and angels. And so it's really lovely to have sort of a beginner's perspective on that. And then yours, which has been lifelong.
Yes, of
And
course.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's great. So, well, let's begin with tell your story. How did you recognize your guardian angel in your life?
If you don't mind, I'm going to go back a little bit before
Mhm.
the angel part
Yeah.
because one of the very first memories that I have, meaning memory before I came to Earth, was when I was about 4 or 5 years old. My dad was tucking me into bed, and at that time, he was very into reincarnation, like in the late 70s, a lot of people were. And he mentioned, this deep concept at the time, which was that we choose our families, we choose the people that we want to have in our lives. And he's mentioning that as he's tucking a 4 year old into bed. And I said, yeah, I know, Dad. I know, Dad. And then he just had kind of like this look of shock on his face. And he didn't plant the seed because he hadn't gotten very far in the conversation. And when he said, well, what do you mean by that? I explained how, and it was almost kind of like, like literally yesterday, this almost memory that you have. And I remember looking down at Earth, seeing a little girl playing in a yard, this dress, beautiful long curls, and saying something to the effect of, I want her to be my mom. And then right after that, I heard this voice as I went a step forward. I didn't really have a body, but I guess what I mean by that is I went to like kind of move forward to take some sort of action. And I heard, it's not time yet. And then as I went to turn around and, I felt disappointment, like, oh, darn. And then literally I hadn't even gotten around or any sort of other experience. And then I heard it's time. And then I remember like just zooming down to earth. And that was my very first experience. And so after that initial shock, he said, okay. And the next morning, my mom said, your dad told me that you told him this story, but she didn't say exactly what. She's like, can you tell me? And I repeated the exact same thing. So that was kind of my first memory, again, from being on the other side. And then when I was really little, I guess around the same age or so, I felt this presence in my room when I was playing with my toys. My parents moved around a lot when I was growing up. And I just remember it was almost kind of like you were in the room with me, but I couldn't see you and I couldn't communicate verbally, but I just felt like something was there. And so days and days and days went by, and I finally said, who are you? What are you? But I said it in my head. And then I heard this word, Michael. And then
Mm.
it wasn't until I got older and probably my 20s, early 20s, when I started getting my Reiki certification, that I kind of put two and two together, where I started to see the angels show up in a more meaningful way, I guess, other than when I was a child, that I realized that this was Archangel Michael. So that's kind of the first interaction that I had. But throughout my life, there would be little things or big things that I would ask questions about, or I would almost kind of get guidance. And it is always this being, as I would call it, never said imaginary friend, because it was not imaginary friend. It was very different. And I just would say, Michael. And I thought I would marry Michael. I mean, it was just like this strong, not romance, but like this just strong connection of love and understanding and bond that I had, and didn't understand it when I was little. But then as I got older, I did.
Yeah, I really love that story. And you share a little bit about that in your book.
Hmm.
When I was reading your book, there were so many aspects that I personally could relate to. One of them in particular, which I'm so grateful that, firstly, that you were so descriptive and so open about your personal experiences. Because I think and I'm referencing source here and being
Hmm.
coming from this place of love and returning to this place of love. And when we've had that experience, right, visited there, gone, understand, it actually makes your human experience very different, right? Because
Hmm.
it's like you can just trust and just know. So can you just share this, describe describe it because it's
Yeah.
amazing. I was like, oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know
No,
it.
thank you for reminding me too, because I was getting chills as you were talking, just even trying to connect with the energy. It's very hard to describe in human terms. So I will do my best. When I was having this, again, I call it a memory, but in reality, I don't feel like anything's really a memory. I feel like we're,
Yeah.
experiencing things kind of simultaneously. So it was really at that moment, especially as a child, that I was able to tap into that present moment or that time of me being on the other side, as well as being this human child. So I know mind blown, that's a whole nother conversation. But when I was there, it was like this experience of, I kind of describe it as being in space. It's what I would imagine if I was shot up in space where there was nothing around. It was really dark, but yet there was light everywhere. It's like this juxtaposition, and there was no physical form. So I remember, I don't want to say being cold, but kind of like, because you don't have a physical form. So you're not warm, you're not cold, you don't have this physical presence. So that was weird in of itself, looking back, obviously now. And at the same time, it was just like this feeling of immense peace and love and connection. And I wouldn't say at that time, if again you asked me and you interview me as this being, that I would have said, oh, we're all connected. But that's literally the best description of almost being this drop in an ocean where everything is connected, but yet you're still kind of separate. And then I wouldn't say that I'm God or you're God, but it's almost as if the reversal of universe and source is giving us these individual experiences so that God itself can experience life and all of its beauty. And then as a result, we're kind of feeding it back. So I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, but it's more than only love and the vibration and that frequency. It's just this acknowledgement of we are all that is.
Yes. Yeah, all that is exactly.
Mhm.
And I think sometimes when people are hearing that phrase for the first time, it can be difficult to understand, what does it mean, all that is? How are we interconnected, right? And this experience when I'm working with my clients, I really experience that. And I do my sessions, you probably do too, with your eyes closed. And I,
Mhm. Which is why I don't usually do video a lot, because
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
easier. Like
yeah.
looking at a part here. Yeah, eyes
Yeah,
closed.
it's much better. So, when I'm working with my clients, I close my eyes and I really can see that space that you just described, that the oneness, experiencing what's coming down, and the way that I work is I'm communicating not just with their spirit guides, but retrieving aspects of themselves. It's sort of a shamanic soul retrieval type
Mhm.
of intuitive guidance. And everybody's gifts, I always say, I kind of compare them to a doctor, doctors, I should say, because you can have
Mhm.
the title doctor, but you can be a heart surgeon or you can be an osteopath, and you're not doing the same thing. You
Right. Yes.
you
Mhm.
just have gifts that allow you to do these various surgeries or examine people in a different way. You could also be a GP, right? You're not doing any surgery.
Mhm.
And so likewise in the healing space. So I'd love for you to share your gifts. How do you work with people? And I'm going to come back and talk more about angels.
Okay. Well, I guess I should probably say that I didn't honestly think I was going to be working with people. I mean, I started the podcast really as a platform to be able to have people share their stories so that others, if there was some sort of connection or relation,
And just quickly, your podcast is
Yeah.
Psychic Story.
Yes, a psychic story.
Yeah.
Yes, my one of my three. That's the most recent one that I still keep up to or keep up with to this day. And so I didn't think I was going to be working with people, number one, on the podcast, because it was really about sharing stories so that others don't feel alone on a psychic story, hence the name, a psychic story. And so I felt led and got the call. My angels kept saying, my spirit team rather, that I needed to work with people and have sessions. And I was a little bit torn, to be honest, because I did think that, all right, I'm having all these practitioners and experts on. Why do people need to work with me if they're able to go to all these other people? And I heard the message, you'll find out or you'll see later, which is a little ominous when they say that,
Oh, they're so cryptic, I know.
Yeah, they are. I know. It's like a fortune cookie sometimes. And I'm like, seriously? So anyway, looking back, it's because I learned a lot. I understood a little bit more of my gifts, which gets into your question here. And that is before I was really doing the sessions, it was more about understanding energy because I am a Reiki master, how energy works. I wouldn't say I did a lot of healing necessarily for others. It was really more about truly understanding how energy and Reiki works. But that opened the door to, again, as I mentioned earlier, communicate more with my angels. Now, in sessions, how I work is it really depends on the type of session that somebody will get with me. Most often, people are asking questions about, I'm feeling like something's missing. What is my purpose? Can you give me clear direction? Or I am experiencing these things in my life with my psychic and intuitive abilities. I don't necessarily know how to use them or how to develop them. How do I go about it? So that tends to be the bulk of what people are asking me for. Now, how my gifts and abilities show up is I do have, and I'm trying to be humble here, but I feel like I have almost all of the psychic intuitive abilities in the sense that I can see, hear, feel, don't really taste as much. Sometimes I can smell, but it's primarily clairvoyant and through my third eye, my mind's eye, and through empathy and emotion. However, physical ability of picking up on people's either physical illnesses or what they experience in a physical way has been more apparent in the last year or so. And also, while I claim and say I'm not a medium, I can communicate with the other side. I just kind of prefer not to unless it's
I,
angelic kind of thing. It's just a personal preference. So that's why I say that. But yes, so that is how, and I'm happy to share a little bit more about how it kind of comes through. But just like you, I tend to close my eyes and I see primarily in my mind's eye. And then I can feel emotions and or feel energy.
and I just wanted you to share a little bit because
Mm-hmm.
you, as you said, you embody so many different gifts, and it's beautiful to just like share with people and to normalize that this is totally a normal
Yeah,
thing. And we all have psychic abilities and gifts. We all have,
I
you
believe that fully.
know,
Yes.
yeah, and I also believe that we just forget, we come in fully these loving forms. You explained your beautiful arrival into human form and how you identified your parents and who you wanted to be parented by. Just talk a little bit about that because sometimes it can be hard for some people to understand, well, why did I pick these people who are terrible to me?
Yeah.
Or, things like that. So can you just
Yeah.
talk to that point a bit?
Mhm. I asked this when I was growing up a little bit because I did have such a do rather a supporting, loving family to help me with this. And I noticed friends in particular as I was younger and growing up that they didn't necessarily have that, especially when it came to the spirituality or energy. And my guides and angels said that they use the word soul group and that we have these soul groups and they didn't use the word contract. I think that's very much a human thing, but that we create this design and in these multiple lifetimes or alternative lifetimes that we experience, we may have these role reversals. So in one hand, maybe if you and I were together as friends, you would be a really loving, kind friend. Maybe I wasn't so nice to you. And then in another lifetime, we would almost have this role reversal. And it was really to experience not just how you felt or how I felt, but how we can grow and evolve over time. So now it's kind of more of a complicated explanation, but they were showing me this through my mind's eye and kind of through all these other things about this is how this evolves. And so I believe, and I don't remember all of this, it's like kind of pieces. And I think when you read books and you hear other people talking about it, it's almost, you're like, you sit down and you make this like plan and this is blueprint and it's architected. And yes, but there's so many infinite possibilities of, because we have free will and choice when we come here in human form to experience and express life and creation and all of what that is, that the people in our lives, it's almost like we're, I don't want to say held accountable, but it's choose your own adventure. So while we may have this goal or objective of what we want to accomplish, we have these soul groups and families that kind of help us stay in this general direction of where we want to go. And that's kind of how it evolves. And so when I chose my mom, and sorry, Dad, he doesn't listen to the podcast, but even if he did, podcast, I should say, well, whether it's yours or mine, I didn't really pick my dad. I mean, even though he was instrumentally huge, and I write about him a lot in the book and less about my mom, I chose my mom. And it's because we had this relationship for us to grow together. And my dad was kind of the package deal with that. Like him and my mom needed, and then maybe they had this contract or this agreement to kind of come together. So I think you can have kind of soul groups and families also by extension. So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so now let's talk about our spirit team, because we
Mm-hmm.
travel through lifetimes with various spirit teams.
Well, actually, I don't know why they're telling me. I don't want to be the interviewer here, but they're saying like, well, what are your beliefs on spirit team? So do you obviously like use your spirit team and
Okay,
everything, like
yeah.
in
So I'll
sessions?
rephrase that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So when I'm personally working, so for myself, I know who
Mhm.
I can identify my own spirit team
Okay.
and my collective of supporters, I guess, if you will.
Hmm.
And I know I have my spirit animal here. He's always with me, and I feel like he's been with me my whole life. I also feel like I have a guardian. She's not an angel. She is a goddess called Naga Kanya. And even though I know that I lived in Asia as a child, I lived in Bangkok in Thailand, and there's a very strong Buddhist culture there. A lot of the temples have nagas, have serpents on the exterior of the buildings, also inside, and that's a very rich part of the culture there. So Naga Kanya is a half serpent, half human goddess with wings, and she has a crown of serpents as well. And she's amazing looking and incredibly benevolent and very, generous
Haven't
and
heard of her before.
loving. Yeah,
Okay.
she's amazing. And so I didn't actually meet her until I was an adult, until I was in my 40s, actually. And so then she guided me to my teacher in human form, who's a 27th
Mm.
generation Nepalese shaman, and she's very prevalent in his tradition. And so I was totally introduced to this
Like a
incredible.
matchmaker of
Yeah, it was
sorts. Yeah.
amazing. And so she's there, and I work with her. And then I have an ancestor, and I have Archangel Chamuel, who's my angel, and I was totally like told to wear pink today. Wear pink today. Pink, and like, all of my pink, my rose quartz.
Rose quartz,
And
love it.
yeah, and my selenite.
Hmm.
But when I work with people, so I'm aware that their team is there.
Hmm.
But and I shared this with Scott. I believe there's a voice that speaks on behalf of the team.
That makes sense.
It's
Yes.
not like everyone's shouting out various
Hmm.
things. One
Like a mediator
entity or
sort of
or
thing.
an entity, or there was definitely someone not in human form usually, but I can make, if it's a collective, right, a collective energy, and then there's a being that speaks on behalf of everybody that's
Mhm.
communicating stuff. So my question is,
Yeah.
how do we tap into our team?
Okay.
How many do people typically have? If they're hearing this for the first time, and they
Hmm.
be like, wow, I only thought I had a spirit animal, or
Right.
I only met my angel, or, I thought my grandmother was, has been with me since childhood. How do we identify who everyone is, and how can then we call upon, I'm sort
Hmm.
of
Yeah.
multiple questions
Yeah.
at once.
Yeah. And sorry for like again being the interviewer and asking you that, but they asked me to pause because otherwise I would have gone straight down. So that was very helpful. Thank you. So my belief in why I call it a spirit team is like what you said. There are many on our team, and for the most part, they can serve. They all are here for love and to guide us and to give us direction. But at the same time, I believe that they have very distinct roles based on what we sort of contracted and agreed to before we came here on Earth to do. And so our spirit team, as you mentioned, can be deities, goddesses, gods, whatever you want to call that, archangels, ascended masters, which are people that have walked the earth previously in human form, and then they ascended to a certain status or a certain point, like Jesus, Gandhi, Mother Teresa, others. And they're unique in the sense that they, because they're on a certain level, they're able to say, oh, I also experience the humanness of being on earth, and they can help guide us. We, of course, have our loved ones, which I wouldn't necessarily are guides as much, or they give us that sort of direction, other than they are always here for love and reassurance. And to some extent, also, I mean, they sort of guide and they give us advice, but they're not necessarily that. There's elementals and fairy, all things. Like I even have a dragon. So when somebody says, what's your spirit team or what's the makeup? I mean, it's many and it's multifaceted. And that's not to make it confusing to people and think, oh my gosh, why? It's just, again, how I have evolved and understand and understood it as I've gotten, gone through life and as I've gotten older. And for me, the way that I distinguish it from most people in readings or sessions is I look at someone in my mind's eye and I can see kind of a U shape because I've asked my team to help me distinguish. And I'll go around and say, okay, this is what this energy feels like. This is how they're showing up. And then I'm able to say, okay, who exactly? Now, to answer your question another way, we can have anywhere between 1 to 30, 300, what have you. They can be massive. And it's not because they leave us. It's just that when we're experiencing something at some point in our lives, if we need more, I don't know, love that's infused and that vibration frequency, maybe Chameo or someone else on our family side or ancestors will step forward. There's that sort of thing. So that's kind of like the makeup of our spirit team. Don't get hung up on the number as much as what it is that you might be experiencing going through. Now, how do we connect? It's my belief. And when I was writing the book, I asked my team, I was like, okay, what do I say? Like, I mean, you can read a book on how to connect with them. You can use crystals, you can do prayer. And they were really adamant about making sure that we understood how our psychic mediumship gifts show up and how is our intuition present and manifest in our lives, because they said that's how we come through. Now, most people, when you're looking about it, I call it kind of kindergarten, and I don't mean that to be disrespectful. It's like when we learn to read, we learn the alphabet A to Z. We understand how to string words together, sentences, and tone. And so that's reading. That's a language we're trying to figure out, regardless of your culture, your background, and your language. That's numbers and repeating signs and symbols. But at the heart of it, the way our guides and angels and spirit team communicate with us is through intuition, telepathically, sight, seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, knowing, all of those things. And when we're not aware of that, then we can be missing opportunity for them to come in and help us or to get our attention or to communicate with us.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
And there are so many ways. And I think when you're not exposed to perhaps being open or the understanding, or your experiences are being shut down by other people in your life, or whatever your conditioning, belief systems, it's very difficult then to witness, to understand those little nudges that come to us. Sometimes in the shower, you get often in the shower, you get, a message, a reminder of something when you're walking your dog or going for a jog. It doesn't always have to be in meditation. I always say this, but you don't have to be meditating to tune in. There can be other things like, some people are really into numbers or animals or, ladybugs, or like you said, a scent, right? You can smell something and that might be telling you, right? There's the presence of a loved one or something else is in your space.
Mhm.
Also feeling, right? You can just feel that energy when you walk even, a building, a room, just even outdoors, you can kind of just feel that your hairs might stand on end
Mhm.
and it's paying attention. So how can we strengthen this? So let's just use one example. Let's say if you're smelling something, what can that smell like? Because they're pretty distinct.
Yeah. I don't really have a lot of smell experiences. I will say that, which is a whole nother story for another day, when I was younger, all the way through college years, I could actually smell death and disease on people, which was horrible. So I shut that down because the last thing I wanted to do was smell like horrible scents and smells. So as a result, it's like if you shut one thing down, then you're not able to necessarily experience the positive aspect and the positive smells. But the times I've smelled roses, honeysuckle, perfume. I've smelled, cigar smoke, that sort of thing, because that was a loved one. And so, what I say to people is if you experience a smell in this instance, this example, or really have any sort of experience that we were talking about, it's really about recognizing and saying, okay, wait a second. I know that there's nothing else around me that's like causing the smell, number one, being aware that it's happening, and then staying as much as you can in the moment. Sometimes it's fleeting, other times it can linger and it can stay with you for a while, but it's about smelling and experiencing it. And then also then saying in that moment, again, regardless of what the experience is, yes, I want to have more of this. Again, especially if it's something that you want to have more of it. It's that gratitude, that gratefulness, that frequency and vibration that really kind of anchors it in more, holds on to it. And it's almost like flexing a muscle. They're reminding me now as I'm talking, it's kind of like Pilates, if anyone's ever done Pilates, where you're really focusing on a muscle and you're just, that moment of, okay, I'm being aware of it and I'm not holding on and pushing it away, but I'm aware of it. And that's kind of what it's like. And so that's number one that I always say, acknowledge, lean into it or embrace it, and then be in gratitude. And then that helps you flex it.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Mhm.
It's and yeah, it's like it's a practice, isn't it?
It really is. It really is.
You got
Yes.
to keep practicing.
Hmm.
So coming back to angels,
Hmm.
are we all, when we incarnate in our human form, do we automatically have an archangel or an angel by our side?
I believe so, yes. And that is, again, because Michael told me that that was the case. And I would equate that more to guardian angels. So, especially when I was younger, and then also when I was writing the book, I was reminded that our guardian angels are ones that we already agree with. It would be kind of like, if you said, "Hey Nichole, I'm this guardian angel. I've worked with you in other lifetimes and you're coming back down to earth. Do you want me to work with you again?" And I'd say, "Yes, you did amazing last time. I want to continue to work with you. We've already kind of shaken hands and agreed that you're going to help me." So we've already made that contract. And I keep saying that because we do have free will and choice. And those are our guardian angels. We all have one, if not multiple guardian angels. They don't always have names, by the way. That's another question most people ask me, because it's not like they're human where they need a name like Sarah or Bob or what have you. They are who they are because of these celestial beings, and their role is to strictly help guide us and direct us and provide that level of support. So that's our guardian angels. Now, when you're talking about archangels and ascended masters and even loved ones, they need that free will, or because we have that free will, they need our permission to kind of interact with them, at least in the intermediary is what I've been told. So,
Okay, so just explain what you mean about free will. We're presented with choices all the time. We may not realize it, and our guides come and appear, and when we're tuned in, they'll nudge us in the direction that's for our best and highest good, and best and highest good only. But we can choose to, not go.
mhm.
So explain what free will is.
Yes. Well, before I can explain free will, I just very quickly want to explain universal law, and that it's similar to like gravity. There are certain universal laws that are in place for our well-being and for our spiritual experiences. And when, I won't say when we were created because we're part of God, but in source, but as we are existing essentially. And those are, we all are, have the law to express and experience love, to be safe. Free will and free choice is a part of that. So yes, we come down here to earth to experience things and to grow from a soul's evolution perspective and live. But through free will, let's say I'm like, hey, I decided I wanted to have this really hard life because I want to grow. I was literally talking to a client about this the other day. And she's like, I don't necessarily want to do that part anymore. Well, we can break contracts. We can say, okay, enough's enough. Feel like I've learned. Did I? Don't I? That's a whole nother thing. But we have a free will and choice to say, all right, enough's enough. And now I want to do this. Also, there was I feel like led to share an example. This is getting personal, but when I met someone in particular in my life, I knew I could see this timeline and where we had contracted to be together in this really long relationship, this beautiful relationship, get married, have children. that person decided that they didn't want to do that at that point in time. And I could see them kind of boomeranging back eventually, but I was impatient and decided, you know what, I want to wait 5, 10 years for this to happen. I want to live my life. And so my choice in that moment was, all right, we're no longer going to be together, but I'm also never going to get back with you. Did that change my course and direction and destiny or fate? Because of free will, yes, it did. But does that mean I'm not going to get to my end destination of what I'm going to accomplish here on earth? No, it means it just is a different experience, almost kind of like a choose your own adventure. So free will is about us having those choices. And yes, there are certain things that we would like to have had happen or have happen, but it's not necessarily all set in stone. It's flexible, it's malleable.
Thank you so much. I'd love to ask you some more about angels now. So we have archangels, angels, and seraphim. So what is the difference between all of them? And some people may have never heard of seraphim.
Mhm. There's seraphim, there's cherubim, there's archangels, there's guardian angels, and ultimately, they were actually saying this earlier, and I forgot. So I'm glad you brought this back up. They basically are telling me, and then and now, that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter about their definitions, what their roles are. Again, if you believe, like I do, that we're all connected, that also includes the angels. So while they may have distinct roles in terms of supporting us and how they show up in our lives, us being physical and spiritual beings and then be more these celestial beings doesn't really matter. But in a human sense, we try and put these roles and these definitions to help us understand. So they kind of mold themselves to our own hierarchy or understanding of how the world works so that they can help us in those ways. So all the angels, no matter what they are, seraphim, cherubim, archangels, and guardian angels are going to be here to protect, guide, love, support us. Now, do they again have different specialties? Yes, but that's because we've kind of fit them in those molds and those boxes. And that's what we tend to go through. But also for me, it was easier when I was little. And I said, okay, Michael, I feel like you love me and protect me. What about this angel? What about this angel? And it was more me understanding and him saying, well, it can be like this. So I share that because I wanted to just kind of give that broad overview first. Now, seraphim, when you look them up in the Bible and history and all these other things, and when I've tapped into the energy, they're angels that protect God or God source energy. They are ones to hold space and energy for the collective to experience this sacred oneness. That's the best way I can kind of explain it as I'm tapping in. When you look at fairies or elementals, what are they? They're guardian angels of nature, nature spirits of the trees, the flowers, the land, and earth. Can they also be on our team for humans? Yes, if you have a special affinity or connection to earth, and you're smiling there because I feel like you have someone on your team too. Because I was seeing them flit around earlier.
Oh, that's why I live in a forest.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say that's also why you live in a forest. But yeah, so I share that
Hold
because,
me
and
here.
and don't ask me about cherubim. I don't know other than, Cupid kind of thing. I haven't really dealt with them, but that's from what my team has told me that kind of their quote unquote roles are.
What do you want people to know about angels?
No one's asked me that before. I would say that right after I was done writing the book, I was like, are you kidding me? What my team told me, and Michael in particular, he said, and now that you're done writing about us, there's going to come a time where you don't need us or people don't need this book. And I thought, why am I writing this book then? Like if it's going to be kind of a one and done. And then they explained to me, it's like when you're riding a bike, you have the tricycles on your bike. If you haven't just jumped straight on it and trying to figure out how to balance, you have those tricycles and those wheels that kind of help you understand the balance. But over time, you no longer need that anymore in order to ride the bike and to fly and to go forward on your own. So angels are really not for us to be hung up on them and what they do and how they support us. It's really a resource and source for us to understand, but really they want us to become empowered and know our own higher self in alignment with our soul and purpose, how we're connected to source, just like they are, and not get hung up on all the other stuff. So while I help people understand who may be on their spirit team and how to connect, it's not as much about that and them as much as it's about ourselves and our own role and how we exist and are.
Okay. I'm going to have you expand on how to connect again, just because your
Mhm.
title the book, Looking for Angels, a guide to understanding and connecting with angels, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And you do have a lot of really lovely practices in here, beginner practices, but also nice reminders. There was some in here for me that I was like, oh, yeah, I haven't done that in a long time. And so there's a lot of nice reminders. For example, your chakras, you're sort of identifying
Hmm.
the energy system in the body, tuning into that. What might you be experiencing? How can we? I mean, if we're really, so I'll just use my example. For many years, I thought my archangel or my angel was Archangel Gabriel. And I thought this because I painted a big painting of him. I really loved in Renaissance artwork the image of the Virgin Mary being presented, the lily by Gabriel. And I wasn't raised Catholic or anything. I just thought these paintings were really beautiful and the blue that's used in them and everything. And then it was fairly recently actually that I was just sitting there one day meditating and asking. And I just said, are you Archangel Gabriel? Weirdly, it had never occurred to me to ask. And so
Hmm.
I just asked, and there was silence, and then there was a no. It's Archangel Chamuel. And then I was like, oh, I was really shocked actually. And it's not a bad thing. It was great.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I was like, wow, okay. And then I was like, wow, all right, that's amazing. Like I immediately understood what that meant, the difference between them as well. But it was really like I was so surprised. So if someone's not receiving or a developed space with their own spiritual practice where they're used to communicating and hearing things and asking questions, how can they find out who their angels
Hmm.
are?
Yeah. Well, if I may, I'd like to add on that before I answer your question here. And that is, I was hearing that Gabriel was on your and is on your spirit team, but Chamiel was the one that was coming through in meditation. So you may have gotten different connection points, but that's, and also at the time for Gabriel with because they do tend to focus on communication, maybe there was a whole reason that they were stepping forward at that time, and then Chamiel now for you. But when you ask the question, how do
Thank
they
you.
connect or maybe get, yes, absolutely. And how do you receive the answer? They keep showing me a radio, and I know not everybody listens to the radio anymore, but you listen to
Some
podcasts,
people have never
obviously.
even.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you're listening to this podcast or listening to a podcast, obviously, now how do you get there? You go onto a podcast player, you find a show, and you hit play on the episode. But the idea is that it's at a radio frequency or an audio frequency that you can tune into. And that's exactly how our bodies, and when I say bodies, I mean our energetic bodies, the emotional, the physical, the mental, the spiritual, that all encompasses it, operate as. So if we're feeling sad or depressed or anxious or stressed, some of those quote unquote lower vibrational frequencies and energies, then we're not able to necessarily be at that same level. Now, our angels and guides can operate at any frequency and get to us no matter what, but we are necessarily not receiving that message if we're not in a state to receive it. And so that's why I talk a lot about oneness. And I don't mean to be, oh, what does that mean? An overwhelming oneness. Oneness can be you're finally being present and you're clearing your mind and you're being aware of everything that's happening, which is why meditation is so great. Or you can also, one of my tricks or hacks that I love to use is if I have to change my mood or my emotion, or I'm feeling blocked and I can't communicate, or I don't feel like I can communicate necessarily with my angels and guides as much, I go back to a memory or an experience that I had that was just unconditional love. So I loved always remember when I held my sister for the first time when I was in the hospital and I was 9.5 years old, and I was able to hold her, and that love and that bond and that feeling of it's not even my baby, but it was my sister, and I could feel it. And so I hold on to many, many other memories, but that, and I really crystallize that in my mind, and that immediately shifts my energy vibration frequency to a state of love and oneness, and remembering when I was on the other side type of thing. And then it's like everything can flow. So if you do nothing else, even if you're practicing that in the shower or when you're driving, obviously with your eyes open, you're able to then shift your own frequency receiver to get those messages. So I would say that, and then ask. Yeah, it's about who are you? What are you? What's your name? It may take you a couple of tries because you're going to be in your head. You may be discounting what you're
Yeah.
receiving, but it happens, and they will be more than happy to share that with you.
Thank you. And I just want to add, you can have a similar loving experience with your for a pet, right?
Right. Anything.
There's
Hmm.
something else, you might have painted something or just, had a hug from somebody where you've never experienced that before, or, tasted something that just
Hmm.
reminds you of a really beautiful feeling, right? And
Hmm.
gratitude, I think,
A
is a lot.
travel experience or somewhere where you were
Yes.
at. It doesn't have to be even a human experience, like you were saying, but I have a million that I go back to, but that's usually one of the memories that I try and recall the most because I can get there instantaneously. So it's really about, again, my hack of how do you get there instantaneously?
Yeah, and that's really important because also some people don't have beautiful memories to draw
Mhm.
from. So understanding what other things they can use as a
Yes.
hack to drop them in, can you share maybe one or two of those?
Yeah, well, I think you did that beautifully. Did you have a certain meal that you were really able to enjoy and wow, that was the best meal I've ever had in my life? Or it's not because it was expensive, it was just this moment of experiencing life. Anything that's really getting you in that, I keep saying human and then the spiritual experience, but that human experience of spiritually experiencing it, we tend to go through life so much on autopilot or not. We talk about being in the present moment too, but there are moments in our lives that we are able to truly feel blessed and grateful and where we are at. So I would just say whatever those might be for someone. I don't know why I think meals are a big thing. I also one time being at the beach, just seeing at the beach and taking in that present moment and just the awe of nature and everything else. That's another thing. So you can create those.
And then how can we really discern so we don't think we're crazy, if
Hmm.
we are hearing the communication coming through as whispers, or it's telepathic communication. I mean, I know, like what it sounds like, and you've
Hmm.
mentioned it already a number of times in this interview, just they're saying this, they're saying that, right? So
Hmm.
we have both a really strong telephone line, if you will, or stream of consciousness that connects right to our guides. So describe or just explain the difference between what that sounds like and feels like versus a thought that's coming into your mind,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
There's a big difference.
Yeah, well, I think it's important because not everyone can experience it the same way you and I can, in the sense that it blew my mind when I found out that not everyone can visualize in their mind's eye, their creative imagination. Not everyone has a visual component or capability. Just like not everyone has a dialogue, an inner dialogue, and can have conversations with themselves and think thoughts. So our brains process like our physical brains process a different way for every single person. So I had to really kind of change the way I approached it and spoke about it. But when I say they said or I'm hearing, I'm using it in the big picture of I could see in my mind's eye. I might hear a thought. I might feel an emotion. I may physically, there may be a sense of knowing. So that's again why it's so important for people to start to be more aware of how their own senses pick up and why I love to talk about it being a mirror. So just like we can see, hear, feel, smell, taste, know, on the physical is the same thing on the spiritual. So if you don't have some of those, that's okay. Maybe they're muted or they're subtle, or maybe you just haven't been aware, but it's really about starting to pay attention to it first and foremost. Now, to answer your question about the hearing part, the way that I hear it, if it's from my guides and angels, I distinguish it doesn't really sound any differently as far as a thought to me. I don't know if it does to you. It's more about how it shows up. And if it's my own thought, my higher self, for example, it feels like my personality. It has kind of my own tone to it. And I'm like, okay, that's coming from myself. When it feels more bigger picture, or they use words that I don't necessarily tend to use, it's bullet points, it kind of just comes through like boom, 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 boom. That's when I know it's my guides and angels, but that's me in particular. So I
No, it's
can't
the
really
same for
say
me.
that. Yeah, yeah. So I can't say that that's how somebody else is going to necessarily experience it. But the best, and also they always say, and I know this can be frustrating, but they're like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's coming from you and your higher self or if it's coming from us, as long as it's resonating with you and it feels good and that it's something that you want to take action on or direction on, then because we're all connected and we're coming from this universal source, we again as human beings just try and make it like this is where it's coming from, which is again why they said don't worry about us, take the tricycles off. You can do this on your own. And it's your own alignment with source, essentially.
It's so interesting. Yeah, like I'm going to just give an example. Yesterday,
Hmm.
we drove to Boston, my husband and me and our daughter, to visit our son who goes to university in Boston, and we have an electric car. So it was a 3 hour drive, and it's been pretty cold in Vermont this past week, so the car wasn't charging up to what it normally does. So, but we had enough to get to Boston. We knew we had to charge to come home, and we weren't going to stay the night. We normally do stay, but there was just some event going on. Whatever, there was some kind of rowing event taking place that we totally forgot about. So anyway, we couldn't stay anyway. But we still went to see him. So we get in the car, and my husband's like, where we're going to park. And I just right away said, we're going to park in the Prudential Center. And he was like, look it up, all this kind of stuff. And he was having a bit of a panic about parking. And then he put in the GPS to stop at this one cafe that's actually got fast chargers at it, just outside of Boston. And I was like, no, like we need to I just knew we needed to bypass that and go straight to the Prudential Center, which I'd parked in before, and there's electric chargers in there. And I was just like, no. And he's like, you need to look for it. And I'm like, I know where I know what we like, I've just been told. So anyway, he didn't believe me, and the humanness didn't believe me. And so we drove to this other location. There were like, every charger was used. There were they were in use. There were 3 other cars waiting. And I'm like, yeah, that's I know. Like it's because we just need to go straight to the where we're meant
Yeah.
to go. And so then we went there, and of course there were available chargers, and we charged the car. But
So it would have saved you time.
yeah, would
But
have saved
anyway, yeah.
time, and exactly would have saved like 45 minutes actually, which
Mhm.
because of the traffic, because of this event that was
Yeah.
happening on,
The
because of
stress.
all
Yeah.
these other things. And I just share that because like I just live on to that frequency of trust and listening and understanding and knowing and
Hmm.
go, this is it, just do this, chip, chip. But to your point earlier, sometimes it is so cryptic, and sometimes it is just bullet pointed, and sometimes when I'm with clients, they'll say
Yeah.
stuff and I'm like, really? You want me to say that? And they're like, yeah, they can take it.
Hmm.
I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
say it another
No.
way.
Yeah, I love that example you shared because I write about this as well in the book. And this was one of the best examples I've ever gotten in my 40 plus years from from my guides angels. And that is that our intuition is like these color pieces of thread in a ball of yarn, that they're all interconnected and entwined, but at the same time, they're separate. So when you said, how do you know, or how do you hear if it's you or from them, or also how does it kind of show up? Another example, literally this morning, and it probably happened for this interview. I was sitting around, I dropped off some breakfast to my parents because I just wanted to be nice and do that. And as I'm sitting there having a conversation with my mom, I didn't hear it in my head. I just had this knowing of, you need to check your balance. And I'm like, it's a Sunday. I'm sitting around with my mom. Why do I need to check my balance in my, you know, app or financial app? So I did immediately as I'm talking to her. And then literally, I saw the balance go down significantly and then got a text on my phone. And it was, is this you? And do you recognize this charge? And I immediately responded, no. And then I called, yeah. And but it was a knowing. And then it was more of a knowing of, okay, what is this knowing? And it's like a thought, but it wasn't, you need to check it was strange. It's hard to describe, but like you
Yeah.
said, when you're in flow, if I had waited after that conversation or hours, it would have been like a couple more charges. I wouldn't have caught everything right at that moment.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? And so
Hmm.
we like when we're living life from this place, the inner knowing, it's felt, it's like a visceral experience. You just know,
Hmm.
I've got to address this right now, or take action, or call this person, do this thing for unexplained reasons, which are going
Right.
to
Yeah.
be revealed to you very soon. But you just have to trust that that's the way.
Hmm.
Right? Like
Yes,
that's how it
absolutely.
is. Yeah. So is there anything else you'd love to share about your book? I did read the whole book, as you can see, I've like
Oh,
post-its everywhere
well, thank
through it.
you.
It
Yes.
was great. And a very different interview with you too, Scott, which was great as well.
I would just say again that with the book, what I really wanted to do was have it be where it was almost kind of a workbook of sorts. So no matter where you are, if you're just beginning or you are more advanced, like you said, you even were reminded of some things that you could potentially do. And it's not a prescription from a doctor where it's you must do these things in order for this to happen. It's more where you're going through, whether it's again prayer to connect with your guides and angels, or it's some other exercises. It's where you feel led, because you're going to be your own best guide and inner knowing on what may work or what may not work for you. And also, I like to say, pick up what you like and leave the rest. And I also want to say that because people often think, well, I must do these things in order for this to happen. And then you can get frustrated at times. It's not about that. It's really about saying, here are all the plethora of things that you can do, and try it out like Goldilocks and see what works and what doesn't, and then go from there. And then over time, just like the angel said, you're not going to need your tricycle wheels. You're going to be able to just ride the bike on your own. And I told Michael, like, my team's never leaving me in this lifetime. And he's like, oh yeah, sure, sure, sure. But they're never going to be far away. They're always going to be with you like they are now. And now
Yeah.
you are able to know a little bit more to be able to connect with them.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. Well, thank you so much. It was so great to chat to you. And where can we get your book and your podcast, and you listen to your podcast or podcasts, and
Mhm.
anything else you want to share?
Yeah. So the book you can get it anywhere you get books. I always like to say support your local bookstore if you can. If not, it's on Amazon. And then looking for angelsbook.com. You can get signed copies from Scott and from me. And then for the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, wherever your preferred player is, whether it's Apple, Spotify, other things, that's a psychic story. And I do have two other podcasts. I have not revisited them yet, but they're Supernatural Matters. And then there's a kids version of a Psychic Story Kids Edition. And that's for the first season is for adults. And then moving forward, it's going to be for kids and teens so that they have the resources that they may need as they're growing up with psychic abilities.
I love that. That's really, really important. That's
Mhm.
amazing. Like, oh, that really resonates. Beautiful. Thank
Yes.
you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Really enjoyed getting to know you better too.
Yeah, thank you so much. Also, have a wonderful rest of your day.